All right, the Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Patine.
Tonight we're going to talk about Survivor Kaoh, Rong, episodes 6 and 7. My apologies to everyone for no episode last week. That was my fault. I was out of town on vacation.
Hiding in the mountain.
Yes. It was a great vacation, a writer's retreat, and I got a lot done. It was very fun, but it did make me unavailable. So tonight we're going to cover last week's episode and this week's episode. But before we do that, we have a comment from Mike K. from SoCal.
Yay.
And he has more corrections for us, including one where I'm feeling a little bit dumb. But anyway, he says, so thanks again for your podcast, which was enjoyable as always. Your photo of Ty and Scott, and this was in the podcast notes for the previous episode. The caption was, "We're twins." Well, obviously, which I had chosen to highlight the fact that Scott is a much bigger person than Ty is. So, oops, I lost my comment there. So he says, your caption reminds me of the movie Twins starring Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I'm saying, yep, that's exactly what it was. I was quoting that movie, so well spotted.
There you go.
Yep. So he says, just a couple of corrections. First, Julia is not younger than Survivor. Julia's birth date is April 8th, 1996, making her 18 years old. She was 18 when season 32 started filming on March 30th, 2015. She turned 19 during filming and will be 20 years old next month. Survivor premiered on May 31st, the year 2000, making Survivor not quite 16 years old. Julia was 4 years old when Survivor premiered. Note, there has never been a player younger than Survivor yet. I swear I looked it up. And I was sure that I was right, but when I tried looking it up again, nope. So that's my own dumb fault. I'm not sure what happened there. But he does go on to say the youngest player ever was Spencer in season 18, Token Jeans. The 4 youngest players ever were 18 years and 10 months for Spencer, 18 years, 11 months for Julia this time. Wait, no. Oh, okay, sorry. He's got a weird format here. Natalie was 19 years and 3 months. Brandon Hance was 19 years and 7 months. Then the additional correction was there were 14, not 10, of the fish puzzle pieces. But I was right that it was 2 identical layers. It's just there were 7 pieces in each, not 5. And so assuming Jeff was only counting the weight of the fish, that would be 7.14 pounds per fish piece. However, the ease in which they were moving the pieces around the board, it did not appear that they weighed 7+ pounds each. So maybe Jeff meant that the 14 fish pieces plus the net weighed around 100 pounds. Or maybe Jeff was recalling the weight of the log plus 14 fish hanging on the hooks. Jeff does like to exaggerate.
Yes.
So, yeah, just back on the Julia thing. That one just kind of threw me for a loop because it's an ordinary thing to be wrong about, I suppose, except that I looked it up and somehow still got it completely wrong. I was off by 4 years.
I trusted you.
Mm-hmm. Well, who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him? Star Wars.
Fool.
Fair enough.
I mean, they don't ever answer.
No, I know. It's a funny line because the answer does always seem like, well, it's the fool. Duh. I mean, it's like the second person's just trusting. It's like, and that they're not. Oh well. Anyway. So Well, okay. See, now I want to get into a semantic debate about that line from Star Wars. But instead of doing that, how about we talk about Survivor?
Yes.
So, by trying to go all the way back to episode 6, it's kind of having to rewind our brains a while back. Although probably not quite as far for me as for you, because I didn't watch episode 6 until I got back from my vacation. So I watched that just on Tuesday.
Yes, I will have to go much farther back. But if I recall, it felt like a pretty standard episode.
Mm-hmm.
There were some interesting things, but there was nothing like, oh, I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah. So if we go back to where we started from that one, that was just coming back from the tribal council where they had decided to vote out Anna instead of Ty.
Yes.
So as we start this episode, Ty is thanking everybody for keeping him around. Everybody seems pretty confident that they made the right decision at that moment. But Peter's thinking about what's his next move. So he approaches Ty about maybe getting out Joe. And, and begins, the beginning of the end for his gameplay. Or, I don't know, depends, I guess, on where you want to put the start. But certainly his final story arc, so to speak.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the beginning and end of his gameplay happened a long time ago.
Yeah. So we also have, over at the other camp, we have Nick feeling a little bit anxious about, kind of being in the middle over there. He's chatting with Debbie. She seems to like him, and so he deliberately decides that he's going to kind of mirror her to gain her affection. And I thought that that was interesting just because that's sort of a I feel like they teach that in sales sometimes, or it sometimes comes up when you're talking about con artists too, just the idea of subconscious ways to increase the other person's affection towards you, is you kind of mirror their mannerisms.
Or just general negotiation. Like, it's not a deceptive thing.
Well, no, certainly not. I did say sales first. It doesn't have to be deceptive, but it is like, it's subconscious.
Yes.
If the other person knew that's what you were doing, it would probably not work as well.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but in any case, I thought that was interesting, but also still kind of the mercenary sort of attitude towards the whole thing that we've come to expect from him. And then she, meanwhile, tells the camera that it's like, yeah, she likes him. She would like to have him, as more of an ally, but it's not going to affect her strategy. She is pretty insistent that he's going to get a modeling contract when he's done being on Survivor.
And then reminds us how she used to do modeling.
Yep.
Which I really hope Jeff Probst dives into a little bit more in the reunion show. Because I don't want to say that it's a lie. Like, I can't make that proclamation. But she currently does not strike me as someone who used to be a model. And maybe that's a judgment, so I'd be curious,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a fun thing for them to look into. She's
claimed all sorts of other occupations too.
Yes.
But so in any case, when they come back with Tree Mail, it suggests a basketball-like challenge, and so their concern is that Scott's going to dominate that, so they need someone to practice.
Well, I didn't finish one last thing I was going to say before we
go ahead.
Which was going on the Jeff Probst, like diving into that in the reunion show. I think that if they were willing to branch out from their just auctioning off of the items from the set,
Mm-hmm.
assuming she makes it far and continues to be as entertaining on TV as she is, if she truly did model in something, I think an like modeling photo of her would definitely get auctioned off. Like,
yeah, like her headshot and resume or something like that, or whatever she worked on.
right? Because I mean, let's assume that that she looks totally different because she's done up and modeling and not in a situation where she's 20 pounds underweight and kind of leathery skin and a little bit older. Like, let's say that we're just missing what she could have looked like when she was younger, and I think that would be a fun thing. So
yeah, although we could probably look her up on Google if we cared to do so.
Mike K will do that for us, so that's why I just
See, we don't want to take him for granted.
not
But
taking
you're probably right. So in any case, though, they decide they need to practice basketball shots. And so what was it, like coconut husks that they had him tossing?
I think so, yeah.
So this was something that I was wondering about. Obviously, someone who has a lot of experience doing kind of the free throw motion, is going to be better at doing that exact thing than someone who does not have a lot of experience doing it. But when you're dealing with something that's subtly different, like different weight, different size of whatever it is you're going for, different height and everything, is it possible that having to unlearn your normal motion could actually almost throw you off?
I'm going to agree with you, but the semantics of what you're saying is not exactly how I don't think you unlearn what you know. Mm-hmm. It is a reprogramming for this particular thing. Mm-hmm. Like, let's just say, for example, like, I'm going to throw an arbitrary number out there. Let's say he shot 10,000 free throws. Mm-hmm. Whatever he does here is not going to unlearn 10,000 free throws. He's reprogramming that for this task, and so you're correct in that it is not necessarily easier for him because mm-hmm. there is a difficulty in reprogramming something that is so grooved into his, mind and muscle connection. Mm-hmm. But it is not an unlearning. That's
okay. I didn't mean that he would like literally forget. I just meant that you'd be sort of so used to doing it one way that it would actually be more difficult to do it a different way.
Yes.
That's the question I was asking.
I do agree with that, but I also think that while it may be more difficult in the beginning, I believe that he can probably regroove it because it is similar to something that he knows that he could probably pick it up and hit it quicker. And I feel like that is kind of what ended up happening. Like, he was struggling at first, and then once he started getting going, but I mean, Nick showed the same thing. Like, once you get going, as long as you just have that muscle memory and you go, but what he was able to do that Nick was not able to do was perform under pressure. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where his advantage was. So while it may have taken a little longer to regroove the actual motion because he was so used to a typical free throw, once he kind of had it and his body said, okay, this is similar but different, mm-hmm. and then the pressure started to come, the pressure part he'd already dealt with because he's played in NBA finals with 18,000 people screaming, and he's able to just erase it and do it, which Nick clearly was not able to. At least the way they showed it, that's what it looked like. It looked like Scott had some, Scott kind of got it a few in there, and then he had some trouble really getting it grooved. Nick started to pick up his pace, then Scott got it, and that put Nick under pressure. Mm-hmm. and Nick just got flustered and just couldn't perform, and Scott just bang, 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 you know.
Right. I think he seemed to get kind of ahead of himself. Like, you know, they had been tied 3-3, but then Nick starts kind of pulling away. It's 7-5. But then it seems like he kind of just stops being able to do it. Like, maybe there was just that sort of sense of like, oh, it's so close now. And he started getting a little frustrated, a little flustered, like you were saying. But Scott just kind of, just exactly, I mean, I think you described it perfectly, is Scott was just kind of just kept on plugging, and whereas Nick kind of had this arc of performance.
Yeah, and remember also that, you know, well, shooting free throws is primarily, like, it gets to be an almost automatic thing when you're very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
What happens though when you miss your first one, or when you're shooting and you miss, you have to go through that kind of reprogramming and say, you know what happened if you've been doing it a while.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't, you don't necessarily know the correction. But if you miss, you know, oh yeah, my elbow was a little bit out, or I pushed a little too hard. And I think that's what Scott was able to learn, even though it's not the same weight, is,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm a little to the left, and here's the things I need to do. Oh, I'm pushing too hard. Even though it's a different weight, his mind and muscle connection is able to make those calculations so much faster.
Right.
You know, and that's why he was able to just start, once he hit that rhythm, you notice, he just got right into it, and just no pressure, just boom, boom, boom,
Mm-hmm.
boom, you know.
Yeah, well, and they had that nice element where, I don't know if it was quite as perfect there on the day or whether it was editing assisted, but just right before the last point, Sydney yells out, "Scott, what you doing?" He says, "Winning." Just like like it was some routine thing that they had been saying to each other.
My guess is it's the edit. I think he definitely said that.
Oh yeah.
Before his last shot, as kind of a last, like, okay, I'm feeling this. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
winning. But I don't necessarily know that Sydney asked that question immediately preceding that. Like, she may have said it when he was like having some trouble after 3.
Yeah.
Like, Scott, what are you doing?
Well, the tone of her voice when she said it, what it made me think of is like it was some routine thing that they had established, some rapport.
The last one that she's supposed, like, almost like a play, like a role, that he's like, when I'm on the last one, you say, Scott, what are you doing? Winning.
Yeah, or not necessarily like they had planned that moment out in advance, but that it could kind of just become like a thing they say. You know what I mean? It's like, or maybe he had talked about that just being a thing, you know, how he thinks about it, just like what it's making me think of, which is kind of a stretch, is in the Battlestar Galactica reboot series, all the fighter pilots had this weird little sort of nonsense poem that they would say to each other. And it really didn't mean anything except kind of just that if you're a fighter pilot, you know it, and it's part of just kind of the tradition and camaraderie of it. You know what I mean? And so it's like if they had sort of previously bonded in their enjoyment of athletic things, you know, maybe that it's like an in-joke.
Maybe. I mean, winning is a pretty common, like, trope.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
but so maybe they had just talked about that trope, and so she's just kind of setting them up for it. I mean, that was the tone of her voice in the question made me think of that, whether or not that's really what was going on.
Yeah, and I'm not going to make any kind of great argument, considering that I watched it 2 weeks ago. I remember him saying winning. I don't necessarily remember her tone of voice and how she was asking, whether it seemed edited. I was sort of just throwing maybe this was the thing out there. So,
well, and then of course the producers helpfully hashtag winning for us.
Which is also a thing. Hashtag winning.
Yep.
That's actually probably more of where the trope is.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Vocalizing the hashtag winning, or even using the hashtag winning. Yeah.
I'm sure it was a thing before he did it, but I certainly think of it associated with Charlie Sheen when he was kind of in his public meltdown mode.
I've never associated with that. What's that?
What, winning?
Yeah.
That was just a thing that he said. He would hashtag winning like on every other tweet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay. You did not follow Charlie Sheen at all when he was in his going crazy over social media period.
I did not.
Fair enough. It's not like I followed it with rapt attention, but I gleaned it through social ether. But yes, that was absolutely a thing that he did. I don't know that he invented it, but he certainly brought it to the attention of lots of people, including me. Anyway, though, who cares?
Full
What?
disclosure, I have hashtagged winning before.
Oh, lots of people have. I'm not I'm not judging that as a thing, but I guarantee you,
I did it in summer of 2015.
All right, well, I'm gonna Google right now Charlie Sheen winning, and there are tons of memes of him saying winning, captioned Charlie Sheen's craziest moments from winning to Tiger Blood, because that was another thing. There was basically some interview that he did where he was just, I think he was kind of a little bit manic and he just repeated it over and over because it was his whole mindset. You know, how does he live his life? Winning. Who cares? Let's talk about Survivor. I didn't mean to sidetrack us onto Charlie Sheen. I was mostly rolling my eyes at Survivor's continued attempts to make the hashtags a thing. Maybe, and even when they're using one that's a pre-existing hashtag.
They have stuck with it. I almost admire them for it.
Yeah. I wonder, maybe the people who are into the whole live tweet thing, maybe they're using it too, but I don't know. Or it's also possible too that just the idea is it kind of primes people to be thinking about it in terms of social media, even if they don't use that hashtag.
Maybe.
Yeah. In any case, Michelle is the one that feels bad at the end of this challenge because she took too long setting the buoys loose, which meant that Scott had a head start on the baskets. And so even though Nick did pretty well, he had less total time to work on it. He doesn't seem to be feeling too bad about it. She does, though.
Yeah, I clearly thought this was, again, putting fault on it isn't necessarily the right way to look at how you vote or anything, but right. I feel like this was pretty much on him. Like, he had it, he got flustered and lost it.
Yeah. Now, it's true that, like, he started later than Scott did, and so there's an element of that. But it's true, we watched that he got on a roll, and then he lost his roll, and that's when Scott pulled ahead again. So it's like, but at the same time, as we've talked about before, like, these are team efforts regardless, and it's tempting sometimes to try to put it all on one person. But often that is, and it's going to be an incomplete picture. So Julia gets to come back from being all by herself on the Braun Beach, and she gets to join the winning tribe, which is a coincidence, right? Because she's joining the tribe that had gone to tribal council the last time. So it's a coincidence that they happened to be the one that won the challenge.
Yes.
But certainly that's like the better outcome for her, not just because everybody's happy when they get a survivor picnic, but also just because easier to try to integrate and bond with happy tribe mates than otherwise.
Absolutely.
It seems like everyone is pretty congenial about the whole thing. Peter decides that he's happy that she doesn't seem to be conniving, and which basically means, according to him, that he can just tell her what he wants her to do and she'll do it. So he pitches her to get rid of Joe as well. Meanwhile, Joe and Aubrey are sitting on the beach watching Peter and Julia in the water going, what is he doing? We're just, what? Does he think we can't tell what's happening here?
Right, like, yeah.
I thought it was funny that it seemed like Joe was trying to be diplomatic about saying, well, he's a very smart guy, but, and then Aubrey just goes, he's a dope. So they would rather get rid of Julia just to continue maintaining the numbers. But at the same time, they're certainly increasingly suspicious that Peter is not really with them. And it's hard to fault their reasoning.
Correct.
Meanwhile, over at the losing beach, Michelle's feeling down, because not least because she felt like she did poorly in the challenge, but also because Anna had gone home. That was, Anna was her ally. There's this shot where I guess she was depressed enough that the others were noticing, because Debbie makes a joke with, as Michelle is going into the deeper water past Debbie, Debbie's like, hey, Sydney, do you think we ought to watch her? She might try to drown herself.
Yeah.
Which is I think it feels meaner out of context than it played in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's still a little mean.
It was still a little mean.
Yeah. I suppose it also ties a little bit into just the fact that, like, what it was that she did in the challenge that she feels like she did poorly at was diving underwater to get stuff. So there's kind of that element of it too. But yeah, anyway, we have Michelle and Debbie, though, do a little bit of bonding. They feel like, they talk about, wouldn't it be nice for a girl to win? Debbie would like to get rid of Jason. But then she kind of, let's see. So I guess it's Michelle that goes to Nick to basically see if he would be on board, and he's just kind of like, nope, that won't happen. You're still the target. I think he's trying to convince Michelle that Debbie's, playing her, essentially.
Right.
Whereas Michelle is kind of put off by his arrogance, but at the same time, she senses what he later says directly to the camera, which is that he has decided to make it his mission to tell her how to do everything in the game. And she's like, all right, fine. That's what he wants to do. I'll play along because it will keep him happy. And then, of course, we cut to the confessionals where he's basically saying just exactly that. It's like, yeah, I think I'm just going to take her under my wing, make sure she's coming across the right way. It's like, all right, yep.
Yeah. There was a lot of Nick moments where I really felt like he was being like Walter from Big Lebowski.
Oh, yeah?
And when dude says, you're not wrong. You're just an asshole. Like, all of the things he was talking about, like, none of it was wrong. Like, his strategies weren't terrible. His whole, like you said, the mirror thing isn't terrible. The whole, like, oh, yes, I should do this with her, you know, and talk to Julia this way. Like, those were not terrible strategies. He was just an asshole about the way that he, like, presented them.
Yeah, there's just something about him that just comes off as, like, creepy. Like, he seems smart, and it seems like he rationally understands an awful lot, but there's just something out of phase when he actually tries to work with other people.
Yes. So, yeah, what your decision to put this person in this position is probably correct in this situation. But the way you're speaking to them, you're an asshole. Like, you're just being an asshole.
You know? Not to mention that it's not likely to have the effect that you intend when you treat her that way.
Right.
But I think he doesn't seem to even pick up on the idea that she is reading him and humoring him. You know, it's like he seems to think that this is a sincere sort of mentoring relationship, as opposed to her going, this guy's kind of an arrogant creep, but maybe I will humor him and he'll, you know, stop trying to do other unpredictable things.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how that works. Like, that is why that scene is so, you know, resonant in Big Lebowski, because, you know, he's like, am I wrong? Am I wrong? But he's not convincing dude that, like, to follow his thing, because he's being an asshole, and he's like, no, you're not wrong. You're just an asshole. And that's translate that to this, like, his decision is not incorrect in that he should have Julia in a certain, he's put her in a certain position in his strategy. But by speaking to her the way that he...
Michelle, in this context.
What's that?
Michelle.
Michelle. But by speaking to her the way that he does, she's kind of like, well, this is, yeah, like, you're not winning me over with your argument, you know?
Right.
And he might as well be looking at her and being like, Michelle, you should do this. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong? And it's like, no.
Yeah. Well, right. It's because what it is that when someone is acting that way, the only reason they're not wrong is because when they ask the question, they are artificially constraining the context of what's going on. Like in that scene in The Big Lebowski, he's just pulled a gun on someone for minor violation of the bowling rules. Right. And then he's just insisting. He's like, well, but he broke the rules. And the dude is like, but you pulled a gun on him. It's a completely disproportionate response. Yeah. So you're not wrong about the rules. But that does not mean that you are acting appropriately in the broader context.
Right. But that's why I love it, because it translates to so many things, like in degrees, you know?
Yes.
Because you get that sense with, even though people don't normally, like, Walter sort of over the top, like, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Like, you run into situations like that a lot where people are like, well, you know, and they connect these dots, missing, you know, it's like they connect dot 1 to 39 and sort of miss all the other. It's like, well, he broke the rules and I got upset. And it's like, no, there was all these other things that happened that you did that, yes, to connect dot 1 and dot 39 is correct.
Right.
But, you know,
well,
it's not really the way that you're supposed to do connect the dots. You're supposed to go in order. Like, it doesn't work like that, you know.
It's kind of like what we saw with Debbie in the next episode, with her just coming on so strong. Because, you know, you can say, you're right that we need to lobby these people and persuade them to come to our side. But you're pushing it so hard that you're actually being counterproductive. And so it could be that same sort of situation of like, I'm just trying to convince them. Am I wrong to do that? Well, no, you're not wrong to do it, but you are failing to be effective.
Yes.
So, in any case, we go back. Michelle is annoyed with him, but is going to humor him for now. So when we jump back over to the other tribe, we have Peter now talking to Scott. He's built his whole little separate alliance, separate from his former brain tribe mates, and they're talking about, well, maybe we get Aubrey out first and then Joe. And in the meantime, Aubrey and Joe are just continuing to watch him going around talking to everybody else and just like, what is he doing? And then Joe in particular is just fed up with that behavior, and he decides to go do his FBI thing, which I was actually highly entertained by, which is just this like, let's not beat around the bush. I'm going to ask you straight out in an aggressive tone, and if you are lying to me, I'm going to be able to tell. And, there's an awful lot of people on this game, in this show who have said that they can tell. And I don't think I've believed anyone more than I believed Joe, especially because we know he's right anyway. But just to be sure, I felt like there was a credibility there when he was claiming to be able to tell.
Yeah, and I think there's a few pieces to that. Number one, we knew. Mm-hmm. He wasn't over the top about it, which other people have been. Mm-hmm. And what he did was he didn't make it sound like it was some like out of this world skill when he actually described why he knew. Like, it was the kind of thing where you intuitively like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like, there was no like secret technique of like, so, they do this. It was like, yeah, I confronted him and he didn't want to give a straight answer and kept trying to deflect the question. That's a pretty good sign. And you're like, yeah, I've experienced that. Mm-hmm. I just never like systematically approached it as like, oh, you could actually put somebody in that position. Like, we've all defaulted to that position where we've somehow like said something to somebody and they were like, oh, yeah, why would you think that? Why are you asking that? And you're like, wait a minute, like, that doesn't feel right. But what he did was create that situation to judge that response. And that's what makes it believable, because he didn't do anything that normal humans can't do. It wasn't like he's like some weird human lie detector. What he does is he knows situations where people are forced to lie, and he creates the situation. Mm-hmm. That's what I loved about it. It was like, oh, I get what you did. You just put an artifice in place to see something that we've all already seen. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That's why I 100% believe that he is skilled at that, because that's all he did. That's literally all he did. Yeah,
and there's no fancy tricks. None of this like old nonsense about, oh, when people are lying, they look up and to the left. When they're telling the truth, they look in, like, because that's all BS anyway, is my understanding. Right. But at the same time, it's kind of like sometimes the brute forcing the issue is the way to do it. You just say, I'm going to ask you in a direct confrontational way in an attempt to set you off balance. And so I'm going to see whether you are scrambling to come up with an explanation or whether you are going to just tell the truth to make me go away, to make me stop talking to you like that. Because if you can't just tell me the truth to make me stop, and you have to come up with a story, I'm going to be able to watch you do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which we've all experienced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that leads him to conclude that Peter is not trustworthy. But it's an interesting situation where, just due to the nature of the numbers, it's not a slam dunk that even voting out an untrustworthy former ally is the right way to go, because then you're potentially at a numbers disadvantage. So it's a tough one. That's a difficult decision. But so that's where we get to the immunity challenge. At first, I was thinking it seemed like just a pretty straightforward obstacle course, but then I actually liked knocking the blocks out of the net. I liked that bit, and then the just stacking the tower, but it being so tall. It wasn't just like a standard like stacking puzzles, literally like the height of 3 people.
Yep.
So I liked both of those elements. I think maybe part of what it was is that I wasn't paying attention when he was describing it in the first place, and so I was like surprised by them when the challenge actually got to those bits. So let's talk about the 2 different strategies. There's the strategy that Gondal used at first, which was to try to just continue lifting the stack and placing a new block under the base of it, versus having someone like try to stand on someone else's shoulders and then still be placing new one. You hand one up to them and they place it on the top and so on.
I mean, in hindsight, that looked like pretty clearly what you should have done.
Yeah, I think the downside, obviously, to the first approach, I think it's probably much faster, but what you don't have in that scenario is someone who's prepared to straighten it if it starts to lean. Right. If you've got someone up there and it starts to lean to one side, they can adjust it. But if you're not prepared with someone right there, so you could almost maybe consider like a hybrid approach where you have someone up there to kind of hold it steady and straighten it where necessary, even as you have people adding the blocks from underneath. Like you could see it potentially go either way.
Yeah. It looked like, though, that it was because it was taller than they expected, that it was sufficiently heavy that it did not become faster.
Yeah.
As you got higher. Like at the beginning, yes, boom, boom, you just keep moving it up, moving it up, put one under, move it up, put one under. But then as it started to get heavier, the speed started to diminish. There was a little bit of a diminishing return to that strategy. So
yeah, well, certainly,
maybe, but we didn't see anybody try it the way you're describing, so maybe that would have worked.
Yeah, it's certainly true that even the tribe that started doing it that way switched to the other method by the end. So we also get Joe taking a block to the head and bleeding down his cheek during the challenge, which he said he was fine. Turns out to be fine, but it was all just kind of, ooh, look, blood. But yeah, so the blue tribe, Chenlo, ends up winning. And then we get a nice petulant shot of Peter shoving their tower to the ground.
Yep.
Which, I think in context is, I feel like it wouldn't be my instinct to immediately shove down the thing that we had just been trying to build, but at the same time, like he's angry, but certainly in context, the way the episode plays, it strikes him as, it makes him seem kind of petulant in that moment.
Yes.
Like, well, I'm not going to play with you guys anymore. I'm going to kick over your tower. That sort of thing.
Yep.
And then they also, there's definitely discussion that the strategy that they ultimately abandoned had apparently been Peter's strategy that he had put forward.
Just to make it easier.
So now they have to decide. So we have Aubrey and Joe in that position that we were talking about a moment ago, which is they don't trust Peter. But right now, in principle, the Brain Tribe has numbers. But does that do you any good if one of those numbers isn't actually with you?
Right.
I mean, because the thing is, we know that Peter was trying to get out Joe, but then once he kind of got read the riot act by Joe, he seemed to have been scared straight, so to speak. But then they really kind of all fell apart at that point, because admittedly it was a tough situation, but for this whole thing to turn out of like, okay, well, Aubrey and Joe are talking, okay, even though we don't trust him, we still need him for the numbers, so we have to go make up with him. And in particular, what that means is, Joe, you have to go apologize for calling him a liar, and so on. And so he does. He comes back and he's very humble.
Stubborn about it. Yeah.
I want to make amends with you. And so we can understand how that would be hard, but he kind of handled it with dignity, and it seemed like Peter was back on board at that moment. That's kind of how it seemed to go. But then, of course, now that Peter seems like he's back with them, Scott is feeling like, Peter, what the hell? I thought you were doing this whole thing with us, and now you've gone back to them because they yelled at you and then apologized? Like, that's, we can understand why Scott would be frustrated at that, and that's exactly why, that's the situation that Peter put himself in. By scheming against one alliance, he got the hopes up of the other one, and now both sides are kind of mad at him.
Yep.
So Julia, Scott, and Ty talk about what they think Joe and Aubrey might do, and think that they're, like, if we were them, we think it's pretty stupid to keep Peter, because we know that Peter definitely was approaching us to to get out one of their own.
Right.
So he is absolutely not trustworthy for them. But the whole problem is that, if they have 2 beauties and a brawn versus 3 brains, the brains give up one of their number, then they're in trouble. So they decide that they're going to try to still push for Peter, hoping that they want to try to have Peter be the target. So Ty and Julia approach Aubrey to basically throw Peter further under the bus, saying it wasn't even just that he was talking to us, and it wasn't even just Joe that he was talking about targeting, it was you too. And now Aubrey's like, oh, well, if if they're actually going against me, maybe I'm going to change my mind. And so now we have Joe pretty reasonably annoyed, I think, that it's going back again, but also kind of inflexible to, and unable to react to a real change in the facts on the ground.
Right.
So it's tough, because on the one hand, we can feel for him being frustrated that it's going back and forth. Like, it's like, oh, you made me apologize to him, and now we want to get him out after all? Like, we can understand why he'd be frustrated with that, but there's also kind of like, well, Joe, sometimes the situation is actually different, and we need to talk about it. Because now we're talking about getting Peter out potentially with the help of the others. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, but in any case, that's all complicated. He's frustrated. Seems in retrospect now that he did actually talk her back into keeping Julia as the target. And then some of the others also seem like, so we have Ty and Scott, kind of come to the point of like, well, we don't want it to be a tie and potentially screw everything up, so maybe we just have to let Julia go if we can't make it happen. But it's all still like, seems settled-ish, but with a lot of raw feelings going into tribal council.
Mm-hmm.
So at the tribal council, we have Peter accepts the blame for the challenge, and it's kind of the Peter thing of like, well, okay, sure, it was your strategy, but again, it's a little bit narcissistic to try to, play the martyr on that whole thing. You know what I mean? To like get out in front of like, okay, yeah, it was his strategy, but like, did other people argue? Like, did he insist that that was the way to do it over everybody else's objections?
No.
Probably not. He had an idea and they said, okay, let's try it, and it didn't work, so they changed. And that doesn't put it all on him. And so for him to kind of make it all about him is still kind of, that's his thing more than anybody. Nobody else seems to be complaining about that. And in particular, Aubrey kind of reacts to him saying that by saying, well, yeah, but like, that's not even why we would get rid of you. If we were going to get rid of you, that's not even why. I thought that was kind of fun.
It's because you're a dick.
Yeah. And she is negative enough against him that now Ty and Scott start whispering that they're going to go back to the original plan.
Original plan? Original plan.
Original plan. And it's like, what?
Recipe?
Okay, original plan? And then Aubrey's like, she's whispering now? And then Joe's like, what is happening right now?
Sometimes, like, yeah, sometimes it's best to go back to original recipe.
Yeah. So it was all very chaotic.
Coke, Coca-Cola Classic.
Yeah. Well, and then it was sufficiently up in the air that Aubrey literally wrote down Julia and then crossed it out and wrote down Peter instead.
Yeah, which when we get to the next episode, I think that she was unfairly persecuted for that.
Mm. Well, the whole thing was just was a mess.
Yes.
It was handled poorly by everyone.
Right. And I think Scott in particularly handled the result poorly.
Yeah.
I think that was, she voted for who you wanted gone and eliminated the tie.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you bullying her about how she originally wrote down Julia, so she really voted for Julia? No, she didn't. She voted for
Peter.
Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't.
Well, and also don't pretend that it wasn't a complicated situation where they were concerned about voting for Peter, because then Ty, Scott, and Julia might gang up on them. Yeah. It's not like this was some united tribe that she's betrayed.
Hey, she just didn't understand what she was supposed to do and figured it out late.
So we can definitely, I think, fault her for just kind of going into the whole thing with an indecision and not kind of being able to move forward. Like, I don't think the fact that she crossed out one name and wrote the other, I think that's really just the symptom of
the indecision, though. They kind of created the indecision, though, when they were tribal council was going one way, and all of a sudden they're like, original plan, and she's like, well, I think I know what that means.
Yeah.
But I also agreed to not go with that. So you got to accept that she's a little bit torn there. Yeah. Like, you put her in a weird position.
Yeah. So in any case, I only sort of have, like, to the extent that I fault Aubrey or Joe for anything, it's really only just in not having control of this situation. And, I don't even just mean, like, you never have control over what other people are going to vote for, but they didn't really even have control over their own strategy at that point.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's not an end all be all to let it go to a tie. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to have an unbreakable tie,
No, we've already seen that this season.
Yeah. But if it's the tie is Julia versus Peter, that really doesn't disrupt the numbers. You know, you revote without them. Like you still have 2 and 2 potentially. And then
And
you could
you could talk about it.
Yeah. So the idea that you couldn't be willing to have the fact that we ended up with 2 allies ostensibly, Aubrey and Joe, actually voting at cross purposes, and one person actually crossing it out, like it was a poorly handled tribal council in a number of respects.
Right. And even worse, I'll keep saying again, like they voted at cross purposes, but Scott treated it like the 2 of them voted together simply because she wrote Julia's name down first. Like I was severely unimpressed with his handling of that situation.
Yeah. Well, and we're going ahead and jumping over to episode 7 now.
Yes, let's do that. And then, or should,
Yeah.
I need to take a restroom break here somewhere. So should we do that
Okay.
now?
Well, now is as good a time as any.
Now that I've mentioned it, we might as well do it.
All right. I'm good for now. So I'll hang out and just kind of talk a little bit about, so when we had Peter giving his
Pikachu.
final words. What?
Can you see him? Pikachu?
Oh, no, he's in the bottom corner, like he can't really. There he is. Pikachu. So in any case, as Peter goes out, there's an element to which it seems like he still doesn't get that it was really kind of almost just as simple as they voted him out because they didn't like him. He definitely seems to think that it was about like he didn't really even seem to get it. He was thinking maybe that it's like, did they really vote me out because I did bad in that challenge? And everyone's like, no, that wasn't why. You're the only one that seems to kind of want to make that all your fault. Nobody else was really even saying that. But, he just didn't have the self-awareness, it seems, to pick up on how he was being perceived by the others. And that's tough. I can only imagine what that's kind of like for people when they come back and they're watching the season, and sort of like, if you really weren't aware of it at the time, to then watch it on national television and watch everybody talking about how they don't like you, that would probably be hard to go through. But, at the same time, it's like nobody else is really to blame for that. So we can empathize and still not let him off the hook.
Were you talking about Peter there?
That's Peter, yeah, talking about his final words and really just still seeming to not understand what had happened.
Yep.
But so as we move into episode 7, you're right that Scott claiming that it's all about the indecision of Joe and Aubrey, which mostly seems to be he's mad that they kind of sort of seemed like they were going to vote the way he wanted them to, and then they kind of didn't, and sure, why not? Let's be mad now.
Right.
As opposed to understanding that this is how the game works. It's always like this. And that they don't have any better reason to trust him than he does them.
Right. Yeah, and so I was frustrated because I spoke his praise last episode when he, I thought he handled the idea of learning that he knew where multiple idols were very well. Mm-hmm. This particular thing, it didn't make me not root for him. I mean, I still he's not my favorite, but I don't really have a favorite right now. I think who was the kid that first got medicaled off? Caleb. I think he was going to be my favorite until that happened.
Yeah.
And so, with him gone, my favoritism is up in the air.
I agree. Like, I like Ty a lot, sort of like as a guy, but not necessarily as a, like, he's the best Survivor player and should win. It's more like he seems like a nice guy and I like to watch him on TV. But that's kind of different.
Yeah. And that's, I have those kind of different feelings about a lot of them. Yeah. So, and Scott, I had started to like him. So and I'm searching for a favorite. So
yeah. Okay, I feel like I can kind of relate to Debbie and Aubrey in the sense that I see things in the way they play that I sort of sense would be like if I were trying to play, I might have some of those same issues.
I could totally see you in the situation that happened last episode where you're like, I don't mean this as an insult, but I could totally see you just getting there, stressing out, writing down one name, crossing it off, putting it down, actually being right, and then taking shit because you didn't go with what was the right thing from the very beginning, like.
Well, I just kind of on that note, it just reminds me of one of my sort of favorite recent anecdotes about myself, just in the interest of like self-knowledge and all that, is that at one point I was pulled aside and told that people thought of me as argumentative. And my first reaction, I didn't say this, but internally my first reaction was, that's bullshit. And then I had to kind of like take a moment to step away from that and say, is it though? Maybe not. Anyway, but yeah, so I feel like I can.
I just had one of those today, though, by the way. I know it doesn't relate to the show.
Okay, sure.
I was talking to somebody who, it's a long story, but they knew of me in my previous job, and they currently work at my current job. And I was asking about a situation that there was about 2 years ago that they should have called me about something to ask a question about work. And I've always kind of wondered about it. And they've sort of danced around it for a long time. And now that I've worked with them consistently for a year, I said, it came up again. And I was like, hey, oh yeah, you remember that time when, you should have called me about that situation? And she's like, look, I heard from a lot of people that you're kind of a smart-ass asshole.
No.
And then we both said at the same time, like I said it too. And I said, and now you know that's true. and she said the same thing, like kind of jokingly, because she realizes that like I kind of talk at work and make joke with people like a smart-ass asshole, but not in a mean way. Yeah. And so she got what they were saying, but now realized that. So it's just kind of funny that like, but I also acknowledged it because I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. I understand why they told you that basically. But it was funny. It was like a jinx because I was like, and yeah, now you know that's true. And she was like, and now that I found out that's true. So anyway.
So I feel like I'm hearing an echo of myself all of a sudden, but I feel like I can relate to Debbie and Aubrey without necessarily feeling like they're aspirational players that I'm rooting for as much as I just sort of can identify with each of them and sort of the positions that they're in. But yeah, like I'm kind of with you in the sense that there's no standout that I'm just really looking at and going, yeah, you go get them. What's your name?
Right. And for me, it's kind of why I'm a little bit harder on people that I do like. So, for example, Scott did some things that I liked, and I kind of started to root for him. And then he did this, and I was a little bit harder on him than I probably should have been. And like, come on, man! Like, don't act like that. Like, you won. Like, winning. You got what you wanted. Like, don't leave her alone. She voted with you. Eventually, who cares what the train was that got it there?
Not to mention, what's the value in hashing it all out right there, coming back from tribal council?
Yeah.
Emotions were heated. I think what was going on there is, and doesn't let him off the hook, but I think everybody was just kind of rattled by how up in the air that tribal council felt.
Probably.
That stressed everybody out, and I think his behavior here was the result of having something that he thought was settled be unsettled for a while. And even if it came down on the side that he wanted, ultimately, he was still left feeling like he had been threatened when he didn't expect it, and now he's shaken. So he's kind of lashing out as a result. It doesn't make it better. I'm just trying. I think that's the explanation is all.
That makes sense.
Certainly didn't seem like he rationally thought it through. And then we got a bit of just Ty's funny stuff with him feuding with the chicken over sharing the coconut. But then we also have just leave that tribe at that moment with Joe and Aubrey, knowing that, like, gosh, we're in a tough spot now. You know, we were worried about getting rid of Peter because then we wouldn't have the numbers, and here we are because now we don't have the numbers. And letting Peter go certainly did not endear us to the others like we had maybe hoped that it would. You know, well, maybe that's because we made a mess of it.
Right.
If we had aligned with them and been solid on it.
Right. Had they just all agreed to and voted for Peter, it would have been a different situation, but they didn't. They fought them on it, and one of them happened to be like, oh, never mind. And that didn't really endear her. So,
yeah. So over at the other tribe, we have Neil doing an insufficiently good job of hiding his idol. Sydney spots it in his pocket, you know, and then tells Jason, and so now they're both pretty sure he has it. That makes Jason now the only person who knows where all three of them are, right? Because he knew about Ty's, he has one, and now he knows about Neil's. Although I guess it's moot now.
Right. Did he know about Ty's, or because there was a situation in here?
Though, remember? Because
yeah.
Oh no, I'm okay. You're right. I'm wrong. It was Scott that knew where two of them were. So Scott knew about both Jason's and Ty's, but that doesn't mean that Jason knew about Ty's.
Right.
Because he didn't find out about Ty's until after the mix-up.
Right.
Or am I wrong?
No, yeah, there was a scene in here where they discussed Ty having it or somebody having it.
Yeah, because I was feeling like I was pretty sure that he knew where all three were at that point.
Yeah, I didn't feel that.
In any case, he is pleased as punch because he has all the power. That's what he says. I mean, you know, having an idol and knowing where another one is, that's not insignificant. But we don't go to a challenge. We have merge. Everybody is happy but anxious. Debbie in particular is very proactive, optimistic, but she's raring to go. Whereas everybody else kind of feels like, let's maybe cool it down a notch. Slow your roll. Aubrey, though, at this point is very relieved to be reunited with Neil and Debbie, especially since she and Joe were in a tough spot. And so the merged tribe consisted of 4 people from the original Beauty tribe, 4 people from the original Brain tribe, and 3 from Brawn. And so it pretty, there's some initial discussion of the Beauty and Brain aligning to take out the Brawn, but that doesn't seem to last long, and it pretty quickly settles into a both the brains and the beauty each trying to lobby the bronze to their side. But especially just because, and there's some, the bronze seem more inclined to side with the beauty, because especially because Ty and Julia are now very close with Scott, after the whole, after being with him on that side. And so Nick is interested in making some kind of a move, but he doesn't want to pin himself down. He doesn't want really, though, to try to align with the brains to take out the bronze, because he knows that, two of his beauty people won't want to do that. In the meantime, we have Jason and Scott lobbying Nick. They want to target Neil, and there's some initial discussion of trying to split the vote, because he might do his idol. But I think the reason that talk doesn't last very long is because they don't have the numbers to do that. It's it's like even 7-on-4. You can't split the vote. It's your higher voted side would only be a tie. So I think as much as they might have wanted to, their better bet is to just try to do a fake out. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what they try to do, is try to convince everybody that it's going to be Aubrey, or rather convince everyone that it would be Neil. So he plays the idol, but it's actually Aubrey.
Yes.
So let's see. Nick is thrilled that Jason and Scott just seem to bring him into their alliance like it's no thing. They tell him about the idol that he's got, that Jason's got, and they're just sharing everything with him, and he's kind of like, thanks, but boy, you guys are kind of overconfident. You seem like overly assured that I'm with you when I haven't even decided yet. In the meantime, Debbie and Joe approach Ty. Debbie starts talking to Ty like all she has to do is offer an alliance and he'll jump on it, even though it's like that doesn't track.
Yeah, I love that Ty's like, oh, Debbie's so nice to me, but I just don't want to align with her because she's very sketchy.
Yeah. She's doing a really hard sell, and it's like not even the hard sell. It's more like guess what? I know you've been wanting it. We're going to give you the alliance. It's a done deal. And he's like, was there a question in there? Are you asking me to align with you? No, you've just declared without even consulting me that we're aligned now. Because obviously that's what I want. Is that your thinking? And so apparently Debbie goes to Nick and Michelle and kind of does the same thing. And in the meantime, Aubrey and Neil are concerned that she is actively harming the cause. And this is where we got a sneak preview of what was going to turn out to be a bigger deal later. Nick says, hey, look, I got some kind of an infection on my knee. Now, I had actually been spoiled just a little bit. I didn't watch this Wednesday night. I watched it right after work on Thursday. And I had seen a tweet that by accident, that did not spoil everything, but what it said is, I think they should replace tribal council with an infection inspection every week. They're joking, obviously, but that at the same time tells me a lot, right? And so even at that point, just sort of a casual reference to him having an infection on his knee makes me go, oh, okay, I get it. So, because obviously, we got the broader discussion at the challenge, but but he was the only one that got that earlier reference too.
Yeah.
So both the Braun and okay, no, I said this wrong. I said, okay, maybe I wrote this wrong. But what I wrote here is both the Bronze and the Brains think that they have the beauties on their side. Yeah, okay, that's correct.
It is correct. Yeah.
What I said earlier was wrong, which is that what it settles into is the Brains and the Beauty each lobbying the Bronze, but that's wrong. It seems like that would have been it because you got the 4 and the 4, and why wouldn't they be fighting over the 3? But that's just not how it shook out.
Right.
So we've got Nick and Aubrey and talking, and he's basically telling her, it's like, listen, you have some good points to make, but I just really am made uncomfortable by how hard Debbie is pushing. And so in particular, Neil and Aubrey kind of are just discussing, like, what are we going to do? Debbie's ruining everything. And so they talk about, having the idol and essentially countering what we know to be the other side's strategy, which is we need to figure out who they're going to vote for because we're going to need to play it probably.
Yep.
So this is where we get to the challenge. But before we even start, Probst says something about, everybody looking sick, which I don't know, I didn't necessarily pick up on, but it's also true that we can assume that medical gives them kind of semi-regular minor checkups here and there. You know what I mean? So just like the idea that pointing out, especially since infections can be very serious, they bring that up when that's happening. So maybe they don't have the doctor coming out to do the full checkup like he does later, but they probably are kind of have regular when they go to the confessional. The producers are saying, are you having any health problems? Are you feeling okay? That sort of thing. So in any case, several people have infections. And then the challenge, it's a pretty classic, individual immunity type, balancing and holding the balls. And Probst definitely leaning into the innuendo. Ty's balls banging into each other. That's never good. Nick's balls banging all over the place.
Yes, Probst is very good at that subtle, like you said, innuendo.
Yeah, not that subtle even, really. So we ended up with round 3 was Julia, Nick, and Ty. It's kind of interesting that out of 11, the final 3 there were all from the Beauty tribe. In any case, Julia goes out, so Nick and Ty are the last 2, but then Nick wins. Did you notice the individual immunity necklace? It looks weird. It's got like 3 little heads on it. It's strange.
I didn't notice that, no.
Yeah, look up an image of it at some point, and it looks weird. But this is the bit where we get the confessional from Nick, where he decides that being the pretty girl feels great. And I'll give him the credit there, is that I have kind of previously described him as feeling off or a little bit creepy, but this one felt like it was all in context. So like it didn't feel weird. It made sense. It's like, yeah.
He did nail the analogy.
Yeah, and it was apt. It didn't feel out of nowhere like Peter's weird prom analogy a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah. So we have the Braun and Beauty alliance, hoping that their goal is that Neil will play his idol because he thinks he's the one to be targeted, and then Aubrey will be the one that actually is voted for and goes home. And then Neil, is trying to lobby them against that plan by saying, well, those bronze, they could end up running the challenges and then pick everybody else off if we don't take some of them out now. I wasn't really clear on who he was suggesting that they vote for instead. Maybe he said, but if he did, then I missed it. In any case, Nick, semi-persuaded. Michelle also seems at least open to hearing them out, but they would still need another, because that would be 6 out of 11 if they could get, they have the 4 brains, and then if it's Nick and Michelle, then that's 6, but that's still tough. But then, of course, are they really considering it? No, not really. But then, before anything else can happen, Medical and Probst show up. So the rest of the episode is infection inspection.
Great TV.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's like it always kind of, sure, it's drama when someone has to be pulled, but like that's not the fun part of the game for me. Yeah. And it's like,
well, this one was particularly odd too. So they're checking out all the infections, and there's some nasty fucking infections. Like, if you ever had a bad infection, like when he's like playing with Aubrey's, like with all the thickness under the skin, like I've never had one like that, but I have actually. It's not fun. Right, and I've had bad infections where like that concept is there, where like everything starts to harden up, and it's gross as shit. Yeah. And there's that weird like release when it all like pusses out, and like it actually feels really good, and that's kind of creepy that it feels so good. So you've got like Aubrey's is like there, and he looks at Scott's, and he's like, no big deal. And then they sort of bury the lead in that he goes to Nick and looks at the back one, which is gross first. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, this is just a really gross infection. And then the knee one, which has already pussed out, that one didn't seem like that big of a deal anymore. I had, well, not only just because I had been spoiled at least a little bit, and we had the previous note of the one on his knee, which just makes me think that like that. So I was already more inclined to assume that was going to be the one that would be a problem. But you also may recall that several seasons back when Penner had to be evacuated, it was exactly the same thing. It was an infection near his knee, and they pulled him for the exact same reason, which is that even if the infection is not so bad now, if it gets into the joint, it can completely irreversibly ruin the joint in very short amount of time. Yes. Yeah. And I'm particularly sensitive to that. I mean, I haven't had an infection in my knee, but I tore my ACL, and certainly the idea of having something permanently damage a joint like that is not. And my joint is permanently damaged. Like, yes, my ACL has been repaired, so I can do stuff, but the cartilage damage that was done along with it, that like basically has caused me arthritis like early, like that ain't never. That's a permanent damage to my knee, and also all the scar tissue and trauma and all the other things that come along with having a surgery. Like, my knee has been irreversibly damaged for the last 10 years, and it's sucked for 10 years. I mean, I can do stuff, but I have all these, like, there's like a whole just routine and ritual I have to go through every time I want to do something. Like, I have compressions and muscle release things with foam rollers and like all this shit I got to do. Yeah. And it's all because of that. Like, it was irreversible damage. I get it. Like, I'm sensitive to it. So yeah. That just reminds me of a bit from Louis C.K., this stand-up comedian. He has a bit where he's talking about getting older,
in general, and I think it was his ankle. So he goes to the doctor and is like, so well, what's going on there? What's wrong with it? And he's like, you've got a fucked up ankle. That's your diagnosis. It's like, but it's like, is there any like surgery you could do to fix it? And he's like, nah. Look, if you were a 20-year-old athlete, there would be something we could do, but no, not for you. And then it's like, but if you're worried about it, I can give you this list of like exercises that you can do with it. Like 10 minutes stretching it out in the morning. And Bluey's like, okay, and how long do I have to do that? It's like, no, that's just what you do now.
That's the part that wasn't like I did get the surgery that like the 20-year-old athlete. Like I have my knee is as far as the ACL perspective is fully repaired.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can do anything. I can ski, I can play basketball, I can play soccer, I can do everything that you can do with an ACL. But the other part is just what I do now.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you want to go run? Oh, yeah, sure. And I talked to my doctor even like a year ago, and he was like, yeah, as long as you run like 20 miles a week, like or less, that you're gonna be fine. Like you're not gonna do anything to it. But yeah, you have to do all of those precautions. Yeah, all of that stuff. Just like not to not hurt it, but just so that you're comfortable. Like I can go and just run all I want, but it will swell up like a fucking balloon. Like that it's not hurting it. It's just that's how it is now. So yes, having irreversible damage to your knee sucks. And I don't want any of them to have that.
Right. So, I mean, I think that, like...
But it does kind of suck that it feels like... It feels like you watch Neil go out, and it's like... I don't want to put percentages on it, but let's just say 90% he's going to be fine.
Yeah.
They're just not willing to take the 10% risk. And so it's not like...
Well, yeah, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood what you're saying.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say he is going to be fine because they're going to take the preventative measures, right? But what you're saying is that he probably would have been fine even if they didn't take him out.
Right, because the infection had hemorrhaged. And I get the point that... And they made that point earlier when they were talking about lancing Aubrey's.
Yeah.
If you lance it, yes, it clears the infection, but it gives new infections a route in.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a precursor, basically, to like, since Neil's has opened, it's that one is probably fine, but he has now opened.
Yeah.
The way from
it's not going to get better like it would if you're at home and you can keep it clean all the time.
Right, and honestly. And that's what I'm saying. I think it probably would have been fine if they had just been able to bandage it and disinfect it and put him on antibiotics the way they did Aubrey.
Yeah.
He probably would have healed fine in the game. But there's that 10% chance that it would have fucked his knee up for life. And I know what that's like. And yeah, sitting here on the other side, if I had the option, yeah. I'd rather not have it.
Yeah. So it's tough though, so he was obviously very upset. And part of it too is that, as much as he's going to understand their reasoning, I think just emotionally it's got to be very difficult to be pulled for something when you feel okay. You know what I mean? It's like, well, okay, like it hurts a little bit, but like it feels better now. It was hurting more before. Now it's better.
And it probably is better.
Yeah.
But the risk from here on out isn't worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any case, I was a little bummed to see him go. Even more so than just, you don't like to see anyone go out that way. But I liked him. My perception of him was more positive than anything, but not to the extent that like he's my favorite. I'm rooting for him necessarily, but certainly he was, I think, on the upper half.
Yeah, and where I was I wanted to see how this all went down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we had these little flare-ups of, oh, you know, it's us versus you, but this guy's kind of going here, and well, what happens when you actually have to lay it draw your line in the sand? You know, how does this actually all lay out? That's what I wanted to see.
Like now you have Debbie and Aubrey and Joe in an extra tough spot. They're kind of screwed now. Well, and then on top of that, what's this bullshit? Like he takes his idol with him?
Yeah.
What the fuck is that?
Yeah, not really a fan of that.
Yeah. I feel like they need to address that. Because that was not cool. Like if he was given because I remember when Colton was pulled during his season, and they kind of made a thing about how he was kind of like selfishly keeping it. But they just kind of, other than addressing it from Aubrey's perspective of, so about that idol, you know, they didn't really cover Neil making any kind of decision about it. So I was a little surprised that we didn't get a more definitive answer other than just like, okay, so he's gone now, and I guess he took her with him. Who knows? But I was surprised and pleased, though, that I guess he is going to get to be on the jury, even though he was pulled from the game. It was the nature of the reasons for it were that, you know, he's going to be fine once he's at Ponderosa and under the care of that. And that reminds me, I haven't watched the Ponderosa video for him. I wonder if he addresses the idol question there. Maybe he does.
I'd be interested. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will watch it between now and the next episode and report back. Yeah. So anyway, I think as far as the way the aftermath of this whole thing, it's mostly just all bad for Aubrey and Debbie and Joe. I mean, you know, they're active players, so they're not going to just go out without a fight, but they're certainly in a worse position now than they were. They were already kind of back against the wall, having to plan to use the idol in order to save one of them.
Yep.
It does occur to me too, though, that what does this mean for Nick's individual immunity? Like, it just doesn't matter. There's just going to be another challenge next time.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, because they didn't have a tribal council, so.
Yeah. So do they like allow him to keep it?
Yeah.
And then someone else can also win it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. We'll have to see how that goes.
How they play that out.
I feel like I don't remember. I'm sure it's happened, but I think it's more unusual for the evacuation to literally happen after the immunity challenge, but before tribal council. That's not usually when it ends up happening.
And when they're in the individual situation.
Right.
Like we've seen it when they're, you know, in a team situation, and then it's like, okay, nobody goes to try. Yeah. But yeah.
I think the most sensible thing is just to say, look, you would have been safe at that tribal council, but there's going to be another challenge the next time, and it's just, you know,
Sorry, bro.
Yeah, well, you would have been safe, and just as it happened, Neil was evacuated instead of tribal council. So that was it. That was your use of it.
Yeah, that was your turn. So
I feel like that's the only way that makes any sense.
I think that's probably what's going to happen, but yeah, I'm curious to see what they do.
Yeah, if they even address it. Yeah, but in any case, we'll see. What I will say generally is that I feel like this happens to me every season, is that when the merge finally happens, I always feel like I'm taken a little off guard, like it's happening too soon. And yet, I think it pretty much happens at about the same time every season, and just I don't know. I'm just never quite ready for it when it happens. This is all me. I'm not making any claim about the show right now, except just that's how I react to it.
I don't even know what to say. I'm sure. Yeah.
So I guess we got Neil talking about being super bummed to have to go, but the journey was the whole thing. He's glad he did it, so on and so forth. Next time, the brains are on the outs. But is there an opening when Jason and Sydney start to fight? Who knows? Could be. Jason seems like he's hard to get along with anyway. A lot of people don't like him. Although he's not. What is it you suppose, like, the way people don't like him compared to the way people didn't like, say, Peter?
It's not the same, but like to try to put your finger on how to describe it.
I think like Jason certainly comes across as mean in a way that Peter never did. Peter was more like arrogant and narcissistic.
There's aloofness to his arrogance.
Yeah.
Whereas Jason has a more tangible, if that's the word, versus.
Well, I was also almost going to say it's like he'll make snarky comments and stuff, but you don't get the sense from him that he is actively working behind your back to make something happen. He'll say mean things, but he's mostly just hanging out at the shelter, as opposed to what Peter was doing, which is I feel like he's going around and making promises to other people behind my back.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see what they fight about next time. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. Yes. And if you want to find the podcast notes, you can do that at christianaellis.com. And we'll be back next week for more Survivor.
More Survivor.